Are you ready, Dominic? Yeah. Okay, Emilie. Just wanted to welcome you to Coventry in a Wheel. Our last meeting with Coventry in a Wheel. It's a bit sad, but we're very pleased you agreed to come along today. We sort of spent so long eating before we were able to get round to giving us your talk. But we're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you. So firstly, never apologise for spending time eating. Like, that's my second favourite thing apart from poetry. And you ladies know how to put on a buffet, so this is already like up there with my favourite talks that I've done. I know from the bit of the meeting that I caught that my ambition here is to be more interesting than the thank you speech at the end. So I'll let you decide afterwards. You can tell me if we achieved that. I have come with some freebies and I'll explain what they are, and you can take those at the end. This comes into my talk. This is Chatterbox magazine, which my mother runs, and these are postcard poems. There's a full set of 5. They're all from local poets, so if you want to take all 5 home with you, you can. If equally you're not a fan of postcard poems, that's okay too. I won't be offended. So, poetry, and I will start at the beginning. So it's a question I get asked quite a lot, is how did you become a poet? Because it's not necessarily an obvious job choice, but it really is something that I just loved forever. And I have notebooks and books that I'd written stories and poems in from the age of 6, and I signed them and wrote my age next to it, so I know that this is correct. My parents always kept a notebook and pen for me in the back of the car, so that when I was bored, that's what I did, I wrote. And I still have those notebooks that they bought for me, and if we were going anywhere where I might be bored, it was, here's your notebook and pen, and I loved it. It was one of the things that I really enjoyed doing. I was also bought, or we borrowed from the library, a lot of books when I was a child, and with all of my family members, reading was just a special time. It was where you full on had someone's attention and you could explore the story with them. And then when I was bought books, it was for a treat, like, oh, you know, let's go for a treat into town, let's go and buy a book. So it was something that I had a very positive association with, and I was surrounded by them. So that love of words and stories really was there from forever. I was first published age 9 in Chatterbox magazine, because at age 9, even then, it's not what you know, it is who you know. And my mum was, and still is, the editor. It was a poem that I'd written at school. We'd done acrostic poetry, which is where the title goes down the page. I've got a nod, this is good work. And you use the letters from the word to make each line of the poem. So the longer the word, the longer the poem. And because I loved poetry, I used the school dictionary to find the longest word that I could, so I could have a really long poem. So my very poignant poem, age 9, was on the theme of unemployment, because that was the biggest word that I found in the school dictionary. So that was what got published. And then at the age of 15, I was doing my GCSEs, and my teacher sent off my coursework. I went to Finham Park, so literally down the road, actually that way down the road. And she sent off my coursework to a big national competition with the Guardian newspaper. And I was very surprised to get a phone call and say I was one of 10 winners. It was a short story competition, and the 10 of us who were under 18s, 10 of us who were like the best writers, you know, the best examples of writing in the country. 8 of them were from London, 7 of them went to private schools, and I got to go to London to the book launch. And we had canapes. I'd never had a canapé before. That was very exciting, because as I told you, I do love food. And got to, you know, there was a real writer there, and we signed copies of the book, and it was just very, very exciting. And it was then I was like, this is real. I can be a writer. I can do this. the other side to that story, because you're now thinking, crikey, she was like a child genius. No, I just was really enthusiastic. The other side of the story is that the same piece of writing that my teacher handed in, that the Guardian said, this is one of the best 10 in the country, it just scraped a C- for GCSE. So it almost didn't pass for GCSE in English. So it does show you that you don't have to be the best in your class or anything, you just have to have that imagination and that desire to do something. At around the same time, I was very close to my grandparents, and in fact me and my mum and my brother lived with them for quite a while, and my granddad became quite poorly. He got pneumonia and septicemia. Yeah, it was an interesting time. So we went to visit him every day at the hospital. Now, if you're familiar with the visiting rules of Walsgrave Hospital, as was, it's 2 people allowed in by the bed at one time. And of course, with me, my mum and my nan, that was 3 of us. So once again, my mum bought me a notebook and pen and was like, you stay here, and we'd be taking turns to go in. And he was in for 7 months, but he came out and recovered, and we had another good 7 years together. But during that time that he was in, I started writing poetry. And each day I was writing another poem, and somewhere, at some point, I thought, I'm going to get to 50, and I'm going to put them in a book. And my mum helped me do that. I did reach for 50 before he came home, and she helped me with her publishing contacts, her printers. We had 100 copies published, and then I went to various places, mostly local churches, and just sold them to people, and we donated the money to charity. And then I was like, I'm a real author now. I'm in an anthology, I've got my own book. So I went to uni. And at 18, I thought, well, I'll go to uni, and when I leave, I'll be a writer. Obviously, if you spotted the flaw in the plan, then you did so before I did, because there's no stall for that at the job fair. So I was working away and doing these poems, and then I sort of panicked and thought, what can I do that's like that I can sort of, do the writing on the side. So I decided that a lot of writers also seem to be teachers. So I thought, okay, I'll go into teaching. So I got a place at Warwick University on their 1-year teaching course, and it was going okay. I'm not a great one for following the rules, but apart from that, it was going all right. I hadn't written anything in 6 months, because what I didn't realise was that you don't start at 9 o'clock and finish at 3:30. You actually have to plan and mark and do all this paperwork. So I was getting up at 6, teaching a kind of okay lesson, and then spending my whole evening planning and marking, and I never had less time to write. So halfway through the course, when they do your halfway interview, one of the first questions was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Should you find yourself on a teaching course? The answer is not as a writer. They weren't hugely impressed because I was supposed to say something like head of year or like head of department. But they did me a massive favour, and the tutor walked me over to her bookshelf, and she said, all these people are doing what you want to do, go and do it. And I was off the course that afternoon. So I had the interesting phone call with my parents. I was in my car, and I phoned them up at the lunchtime, and they both started the conversation the same way. How did the interview go? I was like, so I've quit and I'm going to be a poet. I knew it was bad because my parents are separated, and it was only the second time ever that my dad had come round. And when I got home, I'm like, oh, they're both here. But they were very good, and they've always been very supportive. And they said, if that's what you want to do it, but you are going to have to work out how that you make a living out of that. So I ended up going back and being a teaching assistant part-time, and then doing the poetry part-time. And it was tough at first, obviously, because you have to try and get your name known, you have to try and get out there. But eventually, I was able to build it up, and it became a part-time job. And eventually, again, it started to become too much to fit into a part-time job. So I was doing less and less hours for this arts organisation that I went to for the last sort of 4 years, until I just thought I can't have that job anymore. And it was very scary leaving, because it's that was a regular income. I knew on that day I would be paid, but so far so good, and it's working out, and I've got bookings into the end of 2025 now, so it feels like it's going to be okay. If you enjoy writing yourself and you were crazy enough that I'd like to get into poetry, then feel free to talk to me afterwards, because I've got a few things here that I could suggest to you that you could do. You might just want to have it as a hobby, which many people do, and that is also perfectly valid and enjoyable. But essentially what I did was I turned up to anything, local fetes, local fairs, and I wasn't on the bill, but while they were setting up bands, I'd be like, can I go on and read a poem? Anywhere there was a stage. And then I'd be like, I've got a book, can I sell the book? And that was my second, we'll call it a book again. It wasn't professionally, officially published with a publisher, but when I did leave the teaching course, I collated all the poems that I'd written during my time at sixth form and university and put them into a book. And I went round selling that. And to be honest, I'd long since sort of moved away from that, because what you write at 18 is very different to what you're writing in your 30s. But last year I had a phone call at the start of the year from funeral directors in Kenilworth, who said, oh, we just wanted to let you know that your poem was our most requested of the year for funerals. I said, what poem? And it was one from that book. They'd had a copy of the book and they were using it as a funeral poem. And they said, we think you should share it with other funeral directors, because we can't find it online anywhere and people are asking us for it. Okay, so I sent this very random email out to some of the funeral directors in the country and went, I've been told you might be interested in this. It's now one of the top 10 poems on Co-op's funerals. So if you go on the website, written when I was 18, you can find this poem. And I do regularly get random emails from people or Instagram posts that saying, thank you so much, we've remembered, Aunt so-and-so with your poem, which is such an amazing thing. And it really is a good example of what I do, is that most of it is unintended. You think you're doing one thing, or you do one thing, and it has this ripple effect, and you find yourself, doing things you didn't imagine that you would, which sort of brings me on to the next bit, is what does a poet do? So, as you are aware, because it's said in the bit of paper, I am currently Coventry's Poet Laureate. That finishes in October this year. I got to do that for 2 years. That was a big surprise to me, because there's a lot of poets in Coventry and in the CV postcode area, and a number of them are working poets with several books behind them, whereas I wasn't, and I was very thrilled to get that post, and it's been a huge boost for me, because it's that validation that organisations see as soon as it's on your CV that you have either been a Poet Laureate or you are one. Then funding becomes a lot easier. People use you, and then they move organisations and they use you as well. So it really did massively boost my career, and I was very grateful to that happening. There's a lot of Poet Laureates across the country, we're called the local laureates. So Warwickshire had had one for about 20 years, so Birmingham, London, Manchester, Coventry had never had one. We got it sort of because of City of Culture, but it was funded by some arts organisations who are continuing to look after that role, so it is something that will continue on. They just suddenly noticed Coventry because we'd got a nice title, which was handy for me. So what does my job involve? Workshops. So I do a lot of school visits.